Maybe you've been in a valley in the past, maybe you're in one now. It's a hard or difficult season, and you find yourself on the other side of someone, and you're pouring your heart out, and you're sharing about that hard or difficult circumstance that you're right in the middle of, and then they respond in a way that is completely and totally unhelpful, and even like, you're like, I wish I wouldn't have said anything to you. Maybe even hurtful. Raise your hand if you've ever been there. You've shared something vulnerable. It's been hard. And people, and it's interesting because when we go through hard things and when we're struggling, it feels like you got to say something, right? And maybe you've been the person on the other end and someone's sharing, and as they're sharing, you're thinking to yourself, I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I got to say something, right? I was thinking this week about this situation that we often find ourselves in, whether you're the one who's sharing and you feel like, they responded in a weird way, or you're on the other end and you're receiving and you don't really know how to respond. So there are a few categories of responses that are less than awesome that I wanted to explore and unpack here this morning just for fun. So if this is you, if you've done this, you can just kind of give me an amen or nod your head yes if you've been in this situation as the offended or the offendor. There's this first category that's like the over empathizer. You know what I'm talking about? This is the person who hears what you're going through and they're like, I know exactly what you're going through. And as you're sharing, you're like, you don't know. Have you ever been there? You've been that person? Or you've been on the other end of that. There's one of my favorite, the Bible bulleter. And this is the person who, when you start to share with someone, they're like, with like Bible verses at you. And the Bible is good. Can we say the Bible is good? Amen? And it always is helpful and it can build others up, but there's a right time and place for what God works all things together for those who love him and act according to his purposes, right? Have you ever gotten that one? You're like, true, not helpful right now, right? Not helpful right now. Then you've got, and this is one of my favorite non-phrase phrases, it's what I call the Eeyore. And you may have said it, you may have heard it. Finish the sentence if you know it. Well, it is what these people right here know it. If you're in a valley right now, don't come to the front row in this section right now because all they're going to say is, well, it is what it is. And you're like, thank you for not talking at all, for being completely neutral. We've got, I was thinking the false comparer, where you share something really hard, really difficult, and you're like, you're just kind of going through it, and maybe you lost someone you love, and they're like, yeah, I had a guinea pig once and I lost him and it was really hard, and you're like, well, you don't, that's not the same. Or how about the guru? Now, this is something that I have done as the pastor. I have failed at this. This is when someone always has a prescription for your problem or your pain. You ever experienced that? I heard a few, yeah. Okay, so someone has done that. Well, all you got to do. Really? Oh, and then they're like, it's probably somewhere around read your Bible and pray, like, okay, there's it. And lastly, one of my favorites is the Judge Judy. That's what I call the Judge Judy. And this is someone who hears what's going on in your life. And the first thing that they say is, well, what'd you do? Maybe our righteous and holy God is bringing down his wrath and judgment on you for your malfeasance. But you did, you little jerk. And it somehow, sometimes, actually makes things worse. We laugh, but it's interesting whether you are the comforter or you're someone who needs comfort. Can we agree that this can be really tricky? It's hard. It's hard to know what to say when someone else is struggling. It's hard for us to know what to do when we're the ones who are struggling. I remember taking a group of students to a retreat back in my youth ministry days, and on that retreat, one of the middle school boys was on a zip lining accident. Horrible, tragic situation where we had to actually have him flown into Erlanger Hospital. And I remember leaving the camp to go to the hospital. I remember waiting in the ICU waiting room by myself for this boy's parents to arrive. And I remember thinking, what am I supposed to say? And when the tragic went to the worst and they lost their son, I remember thinking, how am I supposed to help this family grieve? How am I to help them know what to do in the middle of their greatest nightmare? And not really a playbook for this. There's no script that they teach you in seminary, and I think it's for good reason. It's complicated, and it's hard. And I think sometimes, especially for those of us in the Christian community, we think that when other people are struggling and they're in a valley, we've got to quote a song, or a psalm, or we got to identify ourselves, and because we want to do something good and we want to say something helpful. But I've learned in my few years of ministry, but there are just some things that they're just unresolved, right? They don't have quick and easy answers. There are painful things, evil things, hard circumstances that we can't and shouldn't try to explain in the moment. So what do we do? What do we do when we're on the other end of someone in the valley? What do we do when we're in our valley? Thankfully, as is so often the case, we don't have to look far past Jesus as our model to walk this road with others or ourselves. If you have your Bibles, open up to John chapter 11. If you don't have a Bible, fire up your phones. And if you don't have a phone, feel free to travel along with us on the screens. We're going to see that Jesus suffered well in this scene, but he also comforted those who were suffering in a way that I think is incredibly instructive. And we're going to see this starting out in verse 1 of John chapter 11. This is the word of God for us today. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And it was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. Now you may know the story. Eventually Lazarus dies, and Jesus then goes to visit Lazarus' sisters after his death. We see that down in verse 17. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and she met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Now, this begs a question. Why did Mary stay while Martha goes? What we see is going on here most likely is an ancient Jewish practice that they still do today called sitting shiva. Say that, sitting shiva. Sitting shiva. And this is actually the third sort of stage of grief according to Jews, where you find someone who is in great grief and in mourning, and you travel to wherever they are, and for 7 days you simply sit with them. You don't say anything. If you know the story of Job, you know that his friends came right after all that had happened, and this is exactly what they did. And I think because there's some pain that there just aren't words, right? Sitting Shiva is a way of saying, I don't have clean answers, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show up. And in the middle of your pain, in the middle of your questions, in the middle of your struggle, even though you're snotty and a mess, even though I don't know how God is going to use this, I'm going to choose to enter into your world. I'm here to let you know that you're not alone. I think we can learn something from this practice of sitting Shiva. People would often sit for hours, sometimes days, sometimes weeks. And so what we have in this scene is people coming from all over to sit Shiva with Mary and Martha after the death of their brother. And here we have Jesus now entering the scene. Verse 21. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, the technical term for this is called a guilt trip. This is what's happening right here, verse 22. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus said to her, well, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. And I love this question. Do you believe this? And she said to him, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. And eventually they end up at the tomb together. Verse 32. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, we see this again, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. In verse 35, the best memory verse ever, 2 words, Jesus wept. And Dallas Willard says that familiarity can often breed unfamiliarity. In other words, when we hear something and we say something and we know something, it sometimes loses its punch. You know, there was a time that we heard John 3:16, and it was like, oh, God loved the whole world that he gave his son? That who? And now we're like, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes, you should not perish but have ever. You know, it's like it loses its power and its punch and its effect, but Jesus weeps. Now, if you read on, we see that eventually Jesus is going to raise him from the dead. He knows the end of the story, and yet in this moment he enters in. He lets the sorrow and the pain and the anguish of the moment to overtake him. And he's present, and he weeps. And this is instructive for us to know when we're walking with others in the valley. 2 things that we see here that if you're following along in your bulletin, you can fill in the blanks. One is that we see that Jesus had great faith and he still wept. He had great faith and still he wept. In fact, the people in the Bible that tend to get highlighted most often for their faith tended to be incredibly emotional and alive to their hearts and their souls. You know, David said this, I flood my couch with my tears. And yet he was called a man after God's own what? Heart. So we see Mary and Martha, their friends, they've all traveled there from Jerusalem. They're sitting Shiva. You can imagine the scene. Their brother has died. They're grieving. They're mourning. They're probably clothed in sackcloth and ashes. They're reciting prayers. This is a scene that's messy and painful and probably heavy and uncomfortable. Anguish. Jesus right there in the middle of it. Seated. It's interesting. He doesn't try to escape it. He doesn't resort to religious platitudes. He just feels the full weight of it. He sits in it, and he allows the moment to hit him. And as it does, like a wave, he just weeps. Jesus had great faith, and still he wept. And so can we. So can those we walk with. Second thing we see that Jesus teaches us about the valley is that he spent no time speculating, and this is the big question, why? Why? Because that's the question most often in our minds and our hearts. That's the question in other people's minds and their hearts when we and they are in the valley. Why? And we see that Jesus doesn't give logical or theological explanation for what's happening. He doesn't speculate. And let me say this, anyone that tries to give you nice, well buttoned up, clean answers for deep, complex problems is probably not actually being that helpful. I think the best hope that we have and encouragement that we can give is this: may God get the glory. I think we can weep the way that Jesus wept and enter in and say, I know God doesn't waste anything, and so I hope and I pray that somehow through this valley, through this suffering, through this pain, that we're able to see him just a little bit more. That he draws near and we draw near to him, and that somehow he's going to make this redemptive in time. But in this moment, and Jesus doesn't explain it away, and this is how he comforted those who are in the valley. But it's interesting, Jesus is more than just a comforter. Remember, he's someone who is walking in the valley as well. So if you're here right now and you've been in one of those seasons where we've been talking about this and you're like, this series, this is for me, or you just came out of this, we can see how Jesus actually walked in the valley himself, because I think we need some instruction there as well. Because remember, Lazarus was the man that he loved too. He was Jesus's friend too. And here's some encouragement for those of us that are in the valley now or heading towards the valley. And it's this: if we don't let it out, whatever it is, it's still in there. Jesus wept. And two other times we see that Jesus was greatly troubled. He lets it out. He doesn't just take the pain and stuff it down to a place where nobody can see it and he doesn't have to think about it, and then he just kind of smiles on the outside. And here's what I've learned: if we don't let it out, it's going to stay in there somewhere, and eventually it's going to come out, and it might not be good when it does. If we don't process what's going on in healthy, constructive ways, if we smile and pretend like everything's okay when things are not okay. And you've been there. And moments where you respond in a way like you're in traffic, and I was thinking about this, like, when does this happen to me? And I remember being in traffic and I'm driving and somebody cut me off, and I just like, have you ever done this? I went insane. I'm like screaming and yelling and hitting the steering wheel and yelling and shaking my fist, and it's like, what is wrong inside of me that is making me behave this way? I respond to my kids sometimes in ways that are really kind of unjust and improportionate to like how they're behaving. And again, you may have been there where you catch yourself, or it happens on the other end, or our spouses are really good at this and they kind of give you that look like, what demon has possessed you? Why are you the way you are? And sometimes it's because there's some stuff that we've stuffed. And I'm not talking about just, giving full license to our anger or becoming a volcano at any time and just erupting. I'm talking about a healthy, honest, biblical wrestling, where you take whatever you're struggling with in the valley to the Lord. You have the courage to invite others into the story. And you don't pretend, but you let it out. And maybe you've gone through a breakup or a betrayal. Maybe you're struggling with loneliness, or there's been abuse in your past. It's interesting, if Jesus is the Son of God, lets it out, if he needs a good cry, then maybe so do I sometimes. I know we sometimes have this weird, wrong perception that if I'm sad or if I'm mourning, it means I'm doubting God or I'm faithless, and I don't think that's the case. It just means we're human. We need to give ourselves permission to be human and to be honest. John Eldredge said this: a wound that goes unacknowledged and unwept cannot heal. And so we have to process in healthy ways. The second thing that Jesus modeled for us when we're in the valley is this: that emotion does not equal weakness. And again, as a man, there is this belief that, if I am this at all times, then I am strong. And maybe anybody grow up in a home where like you never saw any real emotion in your father in particular? Just was that anybody's story? Okay, so the rest of you had some really emotional fathers. That's It's great. You don't need this sermon, actually. So, but I think it's really important. I remember thinking to myself, I never have seen my dad cry. I've never really seen my dad show any major emotions. And I remember thinking to myself as a young man and then as a man, like, is it okay? Like, God made me this way. And I remember fast forward to sitting on the bed with my son, Oliver, and he was struggling that day, and he was really emotional, and I was talking to him about that, and then he said to me, he's like, well, you never get emotional, Dad. That's not true. But he was right. I think I had probably, kept a part of what is completely human and healthy from him, out of some delusional belief that if I show my emotion, then I'm going to be perceived as weak. And let me just say, being authentic and honest and real is a sign of strength, not weakness. And God can meet us there. Emotion doesn't equal weakness. Understanding and expressing our healthy emotions are really what it means to be fully human and fully alive. And what I've seen with myself and I've seen with others is that in order to prevent being hurt, and we've all been hurt, and what we can tend to do is we sort of build these walls around our emotions, and we kind of stack them up to where maybe we or others, like we just constrict that area, like, the Grinch's heart, and it starts to shrink down a little bit because we don't want to let but nobody's going to do that to me ever again. And so we find ourselves in these small spaces. But what I've learned too is that as we protect ourselves from the pain and narrowing the fairway, we also constrict ourselves from experiencing great joy too. And so we miss out on the fullness of life that God wants us to enjoy and experience in order to avoid hurt and great pain. And I think the reason that Jesus felt so deeply was because he was God, but he was also man, and he was fully alive. And let me say, this is a much more vulnerable way to live, but it's the best way to live. So let me ask you some hard questions. Has your heart in some ways grown cold or hardened? Have you isolated or insulated yourself or your feelings so that you don't have to feel pain anymore? Is there something in your past or in your story that you haven't really grieved properly, and it's kind of in there, and every now and then it comes out in maybe unhealthy ways? Is there something that you felt like was dead, but that God this morning even wants to bring back to life? I used to believe that those who could go through life without it affecting them were somehow stronger and they should be envied. But I don't think that's true. It's healthy and important to process life in real ways. It's healthy to grieve things that are heavy and hard. And let's be honest. If the heavy and the hard hasn't hit yet, the heavy and the hard will hit. If you haven't walked through a valley season, it's coming. And we need to know how to respond, and we need to give ourselves permission to be human and to grieve. A lot of people that come to our church come because they're new to the community, and going to a church that's already established sometimes is harder because the relationships are already full, and so we get people that are new to town, and it's a hard season when you leave the familiar, when you leave your job, even though there's this new job and this new community and these new opportunities, but it's still hard. It's okay to grieve. As our kids are growing up and they're going through these different seasons, it's, like I look back and it seems like just yesterday that my little dudes were just little dudes, and they're like running up to the car when I get home, like, Daddy, and it was like, this is the best. And now they're like preteens and they're like, they're too cool, and they stink. And I'm like, man, you used to be so great, It's okay. It's healthy to grieve. We go through harder and heavier things where people that we love and we walk through valleys that we never imagined we'd have to walk through. Things that we wouldn't wish on anyone. And when we're in the valley, it is appropriate and important to allow ourselves to grieve in healthy ways. Jesus grieved. He wept. He was attentive to his own soul and his own heart. And I know this is something that's challenging because sometimes this gets a little messy. And for me as a guy, or maybe just as a person, when it gets unpredictable or I don't know where it's going to go, sometimes I just avoid it. I shut the door all together. And so sometimes we just keep going and we distract ourselves. But again, if we don't pay attention to what's going on, especially in the valley, it will catch up to us. God made us to be fully alive and fully present in both the hills and in the valleys. And so if you need to cry, cry. That was a joke about the baby there. There's something really interesting, and I don't know if you caught it earlier on in the text. Look back at verse 23. And Jesus said to her, this is Martha, your brother Lazarus will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Now, this is a reference to Daniel chapter 11 and 12 when Jesus is going to return and he's going to make all things new and all things right. And then he said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And Jesus says he's going to rise. And then we see that Martha quotes the Bible. She starts to point to this future experience that's going to happen one day. And Jesus says, no, I'm not talking about then. I'm not talking about the future. I'm talking about right here, right now, today. In this moment, in real time. This is where I'm moving. This is where I'm speaking. Right in the middle of your valley, here's the question, do you trust me here? Not then when it gets all cleaned up and buttoned up and there's a bow on it, but right here in the middle of the questions and the doubts and the fears and the pains, do you trust me? Even if you don't understand, even though it's hard, even though it's heavy, do you believe? Following Jesus is the best way to live. It's the only way to live, no matter what. Can you trust me with that thing that happened way back in your past that you haven't really brought to me and we haven't really talked about? Can you trust me in your worry and your anxiety that can consume you? You trust me in that thing that's out there that you're concerned about and you don't know how it's all going to play out and you're feeling anxious and you wake up in the morning like there's an elephant on your chest and you can't really breathe, but it's there. Do you trust me? Can you trust me when there are voices and whispers inside your head that in the midst of all the pain and the heaviness, there's this, why do you just, it's not worth it. Why don't you just, no one would even miss you. Jesus' question for us is so simple, but it's so important. Do you trust me? Even in the valleys, can you trust me? That I can see you through. That I can make something beautiful out of something tragic. That I'm with you, working. The risen Christ says, do you believe this? So whether we are someone who is walking in the valley or we are walking with someone in the valley, just a few quick encouragements as we do this on both sides of the coin. And it's this. The first is this, is that we're not meant to fight our battles alone. Can someone agree with my friend Gail and say amen? We are not meant to fight our battles alone. This is true for us. This is true for those next to us. Jesus showed up. I love how Paul Tripp put it. He said this, God makes his invisible grace visible by sending people of grace to give grace to people who need grace. This people are meant to be the look on his face, the touch of his hand, the sound of his voice, the evidence of his love, the picture of his presence, and the visible demonstration of his faithfulness. That's good, isn't it? We get to be that to other people. Other people get to be that for us if we'll invite them in and refuse to walk in the valley alone. Don't suffer or let others suffer in isolation. Traveling the valley alone is a recipe for disaster. The second encouragement is this: determined to be honest. So when someone asks you how you're doing when you're not doing well, don't say, "I'm okay." Right? I mean, maybe not like at the grocery store when you're being checked out, That may not be the time and the place. But there probably is a time and a place where it's time to get a little bit vulnerable and say, "I'm not okay," if you're not okay. Don't hoard your discouragement. Don't pretend like you're just fine if and when you're not fine. Do the harder thing and invite someone in. Do the harder thing and enter in. Last encouragement is this: we can't fix people. Turn to someone and say, "I can't fix you." Turn to somebody else and say it more confidence. "I can't fix you either." Yeah. It's not our job. I'm so thankful. And don't say, "Yeah, that's pastor's job," either, because I'm not fixing anybody either, Like, just ask my wife or my kids. I got my own stuff, right? We can't fix people, but we can love them. We can love them. Our job is to enter in, to sit shiva, not to have all the answers. No one is capable of being the Messiah. We just get to be tools in the hands of Messiah, of Jesus, of the one who taps us on the shoulder and says, "Hey, why don't you, And I so wanted to talk about how we love people, and so I started with these lists of well, you provide meals. And then I started thinking about some people that don't want you to come to their house with food. That doesn't help. And then I had all these other, and every time I had some specific prescriptions, it was well, there's exceptions to those rules. So I think the point is this, is to love someone, you have to know someone, right? To love someone, you have to know what would bless them. You have to know what they need. You have to step into and enter in and ask questions that maybe you don't know the answers to. And sometimes you don't ask any questions. You just say, "I'm here. I'm coming." And then you keep coming and you just sit. And you say, "I don't know why. I don't know. But I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." So how do we love well? Well, we're going to look at famed theologian Alan Milne, who is the author of the Winnie the Pooh books. I'm going to read you a little section from one of those books this morning as we close and then prepare to go to the table. So sit back, put your pens down. It occurred to Pooh and Piglet that they hadn't heard from Eeyore for several days. So they put on their hats and coats, and they trotted across the 100-acre wood to Eeyore's stick house. And inside the house was Eeyore. "Hello, Eeyore," said Pooh. "Hello, Pooh." "Hello, Piglet," said Eeyore in a glum-sounding voice. "We just thought we'd check in on you," said Piglet, "because we hadn't heard from you, and so we wanted to know if you were okay." Eeyore was silent for a moment. "Am I okay?" he asked eventually. "Well, I don't know, to be honest. Are any of us really okay? That's what I ask myself. All I can tell you, Pooh and Piglet, is that right now, I feel really rather sad and alone, and not much fun to be around at all, which is why I haven't bothered you. Because you wouldn't want to waste your time hanging out with someone who is sad and alone, and not much fun to be around at all, would you now? Pooh looked at Piglet, and Piglet looked at Pooh. They both sat down, one on either side of Eeyore in his stick house. Eeyore looked at them in surprise. What are you doing? We're sitting here, said Pooh, because we are your friends. And true friends don't care if someone is feeling sad or alone or not much fun to be around at all. True friends are there for you anyway. And so here we are. Oh, said Eeyore. Oh. And the three of them sat there in silence, and while Pooh and Piglet said nothing at all, somehow, almost imperceptibly, Eeyore started to feel a very tiny little bit better. Because Pooh and Piglet were there. No more, no less. Pooh and Piglet sitting Shiva with Eeyore. It's the gift of presence. It's the best thing that we can give when someone we love is hurting. It's what we need most when we're in the valley. And this morning, as we come to these tables, we need to remember that no matter what, Jesus can be trusted. Even in the valley, no matter what we're going through, no matter what we've been through, he can be trusted, and he's still good. And I know that there is nothing that pushes us further away from God than our pain and our suffering. And yet Jesus says this morning to you and I, would you trust me? Somehow in the beauty and the mystery of this incredible, horrendous, horrible suffering that was unimaginable that Jesus faced on our behalf, the greatest good was brought about, and we see that Jesus says, I can heal you. I can restore you. You don't have to run away or hide or fake it. We can grieve while we're in the valleys, but we don't have to grieve as those who have no hope.